Welcome to the International Roundtable and Exchange on Urban Adaptation Governance. We should start in a minute or two. We're just waiting for all the participants to join. Thank you so much for coming and joining this conversation today. Wonderful. Let me start first by a point of order. There will be simultaneous translation on English and Chinese. And you see at the bottom of your screen an globe that says interpretation. So you can press that and define whether you want English or Chinese. You can come in or out of the interpretation. And if you are having any difficulties, you can please write in the chat, and Jingjing will be able to help you with the logistics into this process. Again, welcome to the International Roundtable and Exchange on Urban Adaptation Governance. It is a great pleasure to have you today. This is the third roundtable, the discussion. The last ones took place in March and October 2021, and really to share experience between international experts, to work with Beijing as the city embarks into a complex process that is not only infrastructure, but it's nature-based solutions, it's behavioral change, it is governance changes, to be able to adapt to the challenges of climate change that are beginning to be felt in Beijing, with the numerous water challenges that the city has, but also the important changes that will be coming in the future as climate shocks increase in frequency and intensity. So this is an opportunity to exchange knowledge and experience among cities that have globally that have advanced on this issue of urban adaptation. And it is really a wonderful opportunity to hear from not only from Beijing, but also from cities such as Milan, New York City, and others, to really share some of the practical lessons on what is one of the most complex issues that cities, particularly large metropolis, are facing today and will be facing for many years to come. So again, welcome to the International Roundtable and Exchange on Urban Adaptation Governance. Let me repeat, there's interpretation on English and Chinese, and you can use the button at the bottom of your screen on interpretation, and you can define what you want to hear on English or Chinese. So let's start the conversation first by the opening and introductions. And I want to first invite Joep Verhagen, who is the program lead for Water and Urban for the Global Center on Adaptation, to say a few opening remarks. Thank you so much, Joep. Please go ahead.
So thank you so much, Edith, for the opportunity. And welcome very much to all of you for your participation and your support and your inputs in this very exciting roundtable. We have participants truly around the world, from Australia, Singapore, to San Francisco, New York. So this is a wonderful opportunity to share lessons around urban resilience building globally. For us, as a Water Urban team, this roundtable brings together two important initiatives that we are employing. One is the City Adaptation Accelerator. And the City Adaptation Accelerator helps us to build urban resilience to cities across the world. And currently, we're working with cities like Freetown, N'Djamena, Kisumu, Antananarivo, and others in Africa and Asia, where we support the cities to build and prepare for the future with a different climate. The other important initiatives that is key for this roundtable is our water adaptation community. And the water adaptation community brings together people and knowledge, and with the purpose of building consensus and a way forward around water adaptation and climate. Again, welcome. I'm really looking forward to the exchanges today, and I'm sure all of us will learn. And that's the purpose, as G saying, we want to be a solutions broker for others around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joy. And if you have just joined us, welcome to the International Roundtable on Exchange on Urban Adaptation Governance, where we were going to explore lessons learned and some of the challenges faced by large cities in the topic of adaptation, particularly on water management and governance for large cities. This event is organized by the Global Center on Adaptation with the strong partnership with the city of Beijing, and with the collaboration of as Joy was saying, cities from all around the world. Welcome to join us. Today the event has interpretation in English and Chinese, and you can see the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. Let me now invite Aiping Cheng, who is the director for China, the regional director of the China office for the Global Center on Adaptation, to say a few words. I think.
Thank you very much, Ede. The Global Center on Adaptation China office is the first regional office of the center. And since the launch in June 2019, I still remember, we have been working very, very closely, mainly with the Ministry of Ecology and Environment of China and the National Center on Climate Change Strategy and International Cooperation on a lot of adaptation policies and guidelines at the national level. So Beijing, just as an example, is the newly developed National Adaptation Strategy 2035. The GCA China had the honor to provide some support to the ministry. And Beijing city was the first city that the GCA China had the honor to work with, and last year, around the initiative of the Beijing water ecological restoration, and we had a couple of very rich technical exchanges with Beijing, and working together with the Beijing Institute of City Planning and Design, who with our Beijing partner, who is also sitting at the round table today, and also the Beijing Institute of Water. So I hope that today we will have another very rich, certainly we will, and fruitful exchange, and that will then bring more and more future collaboration opportunity between the GCA and also cities around the world. Thank you, Ede. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Aiping. And if you have just joined us, welcome to the International Roundtable on Exchange on Urban Adaptation Governance. We are doing opening remarks in this event organized by the Global Center of Adaptation with a strong partnership with the city of Beijing. And to tell us a little bit more about the city of Beijing, we're going to have a few remarks by Mr. Zhao Dan, senior engineer in the city of Beijing. Again, you have interpretation in English and Chinese. You can press the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen. It is a world map, and you can define whether you want English or Chinese. So let me invite Mr. Zhao to do some opening remarks. Thank you so much.
大家好，我是北京
Good morning, good afternoon. I am Zhao Dan from the BICP. It is my great honor to co-host this third international roundtable discussion, and we have invited experts from around the world to focus on the topic of water ecosystem restoration and governance. And this will be a session for us to exchange expertise and knowledge. And this is actually a hot topic in transition governance around the world. And this involves the reshaping of our working mechanisms, our lifestyles, as well as our coping strategies. We have been working on this topic for a long time, and we were the organization that was tasked with the drafting of the master plan for the urban plan for the city. And this year we have also organized and drafted the land and space restoration planning strategy. And this is now a master plan for the city to follow going forward. And in those very important tasks, we have focused on 7 areas of governance. The first area is comprehensive governance, where we take the entire system of the city as a whole, and we look at how the ecology co-works with the economic development goals for the city. And secondly, we look at the source of the water systems. We look at the drying up of the source for the water systems here and look at the pollution situation. Thirdly, we look at governance for the system, and we look at eco-security as an important concept, where we look at all the integrated restoration and protection of different natural resources, including the plantations as well as the water systems themselves. And we also focus on coordinated governance of the entire water system, including the vegetation around the banks and the water regions. We also focus on the fifth, which is a coordinated governance across different jurisdictions. And sixthly, we turn the authority from the government to various walks of the society, so that organizations with expertise will be tasked with the various sides of governance. And sixthly, we look at governance based on the rule of law. And today we look forward to hearing your insights in the various aspects that is relevant to our work. Thank you very much.
Madam Zhao, thank you very much for those remarks, and congratulations for all the hard work that the city of Beijing has already been doing on the topic of water governance, adaptation to climate change, and really trying to bring the best that engineering, nature, and behavioral change can bring to practical solutions to manage the city of Beijing. If you have joined us right now, welcome again to the International Roundtable, an exchange on urban adaptation governance. My name is Ede Illas, and I'm a senior advisor to the CEO of the Global Center on Adaptation, and it is a pleasure for me to chair this International Roundtable and exchange today. Let's move to the core of the conversation, which are 3 presentations by international experts coming from Beijing, from the city of Milan, and from the city of New York. So they're going to be presenting their experiences on the topic of urban water adaptation and governance. And we're going to start with the city of Beijing. Now, just to remind you, there's interpretation in Chinese and English. You can press the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen for the language of your preference. So first, we're going to hear from Mr. Wei Baoyi, who is the senior engineer of the Beijing Institute of City Planning and Design, and is deputy director of the Institute for Ecological Planning, and executive director of the Beijing Hydraulic Engineers Society. Mr. Wei has decades of experience in the governance, planning, and research of urban water resources, water ecology, water security, and river and lake systems. And he is right now senior engineer, as I was saying, and deputy head of the Institute of Ecological Planning in the city of Beijing. And Mr. Wei will be presenting the Beijing Water Ecological Restoration and Conservation Planning and Practice in the context of climate adaptation. Mr. Wei, the floor is yours, and you have 9-10 minutes to do your presentation. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks to the moderator. Thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. I would like to take this opportunity to talk about water ecological restoration and conservation in the context of climate adaptation. I also look forward to recommendations from the experts today and after my presentation. There are 3 parts in my presentation. First is the general background, followed by the strategies and a case study. So this is the ecology in Beijing. We are situated in northern China. And we have mountains in the north, and we also have 5 large rivers. They are Juma River, Yongding, Chaobai, North Canal, and Ju River. These 5 are the backbones of the water system in Beijing. They run across the entire city, and they're very important to the aquatic ecosystem of the city. And we're located in the High River Basin. And you can see that the climate here is semi-humid continental monsoon. And we are located in another temperate zone. And we have a lot of rain in summer. The winter is cold and dry with uneven spatial and temporal distribution of the rainfall. And during the flood season, the precipitation accounts for 85% of the annual total. And extreme rainfalls sometimes can cause steep water level change, leading to a flood-prone city with difficulties in stormwater utilization and water replenishment. And especially in the 80s and the 90s, due to the rapid economic development, the water demand of the city sharply increased in order to satisfy the demand. There was overexploitation of groundwater, which then caused severe degradation of the aquatic ecosystem of the city. When it was the worst, I think the groundwater level was about 25 meters deep. And as the transferring of water from southern to northern China, the volume of the water resources, including groundwater, and Beijing improved. Latest statistics show that in 2018, actually, on the groundwater level already rebounded by 10 meters up. The shortage of water resources in Beijing means a lot of rivers are actually dried out, even during the flood seasons. And now about water quality, as I mentioned in plain sections, which are mostly in the central and southern sections of these rivers, the ecological volume requirements are poorly satisfied. And the water quality itself is also is substandard. And apart from the overexploitation, the groundwater is also confronted with lots of pollutants discharged from a drainage system, and in certain areas we see that the water quality is severely challenged. And we have the 4th aquifer, on which mainly supplies water to households. And the 4th aquifer itself is up to standard and does not have any pollution for the time being. And this was a survey that we conducted in the North Canal River Basin in 2014, and we looked at the major aquatic species here. And including the benthic animals and the fish, and we saw that water quality of the canal was very poor, and the biodiversity index was very low. And so that is the background of the ecosystem of Beijing, which is closely tied to the temperate zone and climate patterns of the city. And as the urban development of the city advanced, we see that there has already been a lot of new improvements, especially with the help of the transferred water from the south of China, as well as efforts that the city has made to improve the water quality and the awareness raising and water conservation. And our institute has also conducted a few programs in terms of improving the water management of the city in terms of 3 fronts, namely the basin, the spatial planning, and the implementation. So I'll start with the basin level program. And for on water resources, Beijing already mentioned that a key project is the water transfer from southern to northern China, completed in 2018. The water from Yangtze River was diverted to Beijing every year, about 1 billion cubic meters. It was transferred to Beijing, and most of them were supplied to the domestic and industrial uses, but also used to discharge rivers as well as the groundwater. Also, water from the Yellow River was diverted to Beijing, and specifically to Guanting Reservoir from the Shanxi Basin of the Yellow Water to Beijing. And that helped with the fertility of the soil in the Yongding River Basin, which actually had been dried out for 25 years before the transferring project. And because of the diverted water in 2021, the entire river system was replenished. And this segment covered from the Guanting Reservoir to the Tianjin branch of the Yongding River. And at the same time, the upstream of this river in Shanxi and Hebei actually intensified their efforts on water conservation. And take Hebei as an example, in Zhangjiakou City and Chengde City. They also restructured the agricultural and industrial water use in order to guarantee the water volume in downstreams. And within the Beijing city, we increased the connectivity among the 5 river systems, and with water transfers across different river basins, we really managed to increase the volume of ecological water. And in particular, the transferring of water resources in flood season helped to optimize the basin structure of the city. And the transferred water benefited not just the rivers, but also reservoirs and groundwater levels. We also increased the recycling and reuse of the water. Well, we had 4 billion cubic meters of water demand in Beijing per year, and over 25% or over a quarter actually comes from reclaimed water. And that also has been very conducive to the improvement of the water environment of the city. Next on aquatic the ecosystem, because we're just talking about the replenishment of the water, and now let's look at the water quality in the ecosystem. We have many rivers that run across multiple provinces, and we intensified our efforts on the production of the cross sections in the river. We also can put in place evaluation systems of water quality. Take a Fengtai district as an example. If a water is flowing to lower streams, and the Fengtai district has to ensure that water going to these lower branches are up to a certain standard. Otherwise, the polluters must pay. Next is on flood control, which is done at provincial and municipal levels. And the provinces and the cities control the water level for flood control, especially for the rivers that flow into other provinces. Take the North Canal River and Yongding River as examples. Both rivers flow from Beijing to the neighboring Hebei province. And so Beijing, within the city, increased a lot of floodplains and especially in the basin of North Canal River, on which and actually has most of the drainage system and discharge pipes in the city center. And so there is a control of the runoffs in the North Canal River basin. The increase of the runoffs has to be fully absorbed by the river basin itself, and in order to increase the effectiveness of the flood control structures, we also increase the coordination between the two riverbanks and the upstreams and downstreams, and by introducing a set of standards for these embankment and other earthen structures to ensure in particular the dikes in the upstream of Yongding River are meeting the requirements. We made sure that the dikes are robust for floods that are seen once every 200 years on the left bank, and on the right bank the requirements are relatively lower because they are by tall mountains, and we have a subcenter of Beijing located right here. We have increased the flood control requirements here, but for the mid and lower streams of the river, which are less prone, flood prone, the requirements are lower. In this way, we can really strategically distribute the resources of flood control to maximize the effectiveness of the measures. We also adapted the measures to the climate patterns of Beijing. We understand that in non-flood seasons, actually runoffs are very limited. That is why we decided to reflect that in the spatial planning. And so here on it, you can see
how the flood has gone through smoothly with this arrangement. On both banks, there's going to be vegetation planted as well as greened areas on the banks, so that there is actually enough space when there is an overflow situation. And there has also been pollution control and prevention on these bank areas in the drainage area. This is a section view of this river system. There is also an area of coordination where we would give full play to various features. As Beijing was built into a city, there has been a lot of demand for building materials, including gravel and sand. And the space created by the exploitation of sand and gravel has been filled in later on, and it has been used as space to plant trees and other vegetation. And in the central areas of city, there has been urban ecosystem build-ups and landscape features where we have green belts planted around the central areas of the city. And the city is also studded with green open spaces and banks. In this way, we can fully use the extraction holes where sand and gravel had been taken out, as well as lower areas in the city and green spaces in parks. And these can also be used as buffer zones for flash waters, flash floods in the city. As we plan, we also take this into consideration, especially after the July 21st flood in Beijing. We have put in great efforts to build in adjustment zones in the city, as well as building sizable eco parks. These parks during normal days will be a great area for people to enjoy life by the nature, and in flooding times in the cities, they can work as an excellent buffer. In spatial coordination, as I mentioned before, there has been a lot of work being put into clearing out of or dredging of the rivers. And sometimes where the riverbed sections are dried up, in order to help protect the quality of the water, as well as guaranteeing the demand for arable land, some of the dried up riverbed had been used to plant trees, to build public facilities and infrastructure for leisure purposes, as well as also putting in a ban for any other purposes of city construction. This is as we coordinate from the planning stage in the drainage areas, and then we talk about the newly released Beijing River Planning and Design Guidelines. This was completed by us in the past 2 years, and this is a comprehensive guideline on how we manage and govern the water systems in the city. And it is the requirement of the guidelines to have coordinated governance of the riverbeds, making sure that we recognize the diversified as well as integrated roles played by water systems in the city. And as we design different features, we must consider the system as a whole. And as we build up on both banks of the river systems, this requires a coordination with the local jurisdiction. So we might have different government agencies in charge of the different parts of the planning, such as water quality and the building up of the landscape. However, all of these agencies will be working under a coordinated master plan. As we manage the coordination, we would actually see and recognize that the pressure is mostly on the environmental government ministries. And so we would define and also distribute the different parts of the task to various agencies that are in charge. And we also have an accounting system where we have river directors at the municipal level, at the district level, and at the township and village level. These people are appointed to play the coordination role and lead role at their various levels. As we implement our plans, this also needs to be done in a coordinated way. It goes from top down, where it's headed and guided by the set of guidelines and a master plan for the planning. Once we have the plan, different government agencies must work in coordination along the planned route of infrastructure build-up as well as landscaping efforts. We actually would achieve a coordinated effort by economic planning and urban planning agencies, as well as environmental and ecosystem planning agencies. If you pay attention to how Beijing has been doing these work, you would see that Beijing has achieved several pleasant achievements in terms of waterfront living and lifestyle regions, such as along the Liangmahe River. And we have also been working with the private sector to build up these waterfront areas where people will have an opportunity to enjoy life on the riverbank. And government also would be making investments alongside the private sector to build these areas into a space where the residents are able to enjoy the beautiful scenery, as well as enliven the local economy. Two typical cases to share with you, because we're focusing on water ecosystem restoration. The first case is the Yongdinghe catchment area. This is a major river in North China, and in 2016, the National Administration for Forest and Grassland had joined with other two ministries to issue a comprehensive governance plan for Yongdinghe catchment. And this is being carried out by Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei province. Before the governance effort came in, this right-hand photo is what it looked like. For long periods of time, the water has been dried up, and the river catchment ecosystem has been badly deteriorated. After the plan has kicked in, we have looked at different segments of the river. And after outside Beijing and going into Tianjin until the river goes into the sea, there are focus areas where efforts have been coordinated for the different cities and provinces to make investments. A specific catchment company has been set up to guide the restoration. This company is in charge of looking at the financing for different parts of the implementation of the project. And the key target is to regain a running river, a clean river, a green river, and a safe river. And this is, again, a coordinated effort taking into consideration of the local characteristics. So we have a catchment area in the Guanting Reservoir. This is an area where the drinking water for the city are supplied. So this area is a preserved and protected area. And then we have the valley catchment area. And this is actually a segment of aquifers that is very important to maintaining the health of the river systems downstream. And so we are protecting this area so that its returned health will be able to provide and inject new livelihood to the bottom or the lower stream of the section. And the lower stream section of the river is the plain ecosystem leisure area. This segment is being built into an area where there's leisure space for the residents.
If you have 2 more minutes so that we can move to the next presentation.
Very well, thank you very much, moderator. I am coming to an end of my presentation. So again, this is for the Yongdinghe catchment area. And we wanted to take full use of the ecosystem products that can be provided by this river. It plays an important role in flood control and prevention, as well as providing leisure systems and space for the residents. Very quickly, I'll go through the Chaobaihe River. This is also a very important river for Beijing and a source of drinking water for the urban residents. We are making a coordinated effort so we can create a system, a green ecosystem around the river that serves the economic growth and social growth of the communities along the river. And the water gets fed from recycled water as well as surface water. And these surface water after treatment would feed back to the underground aquifers. So this is our work where we had divided the different regions along the catchment area into different functional spaces, and they each carry out their specific roles in restoration of the health of the ecosystem. Here we can see how regional governance will improve the health of the rivers themselves, and the water quality has been improved as well. And yesterday is the International Water Day, and this week is actually the Water Week here in China. So let us join hands and work together to cherish water, which is a precious resource. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wei, and I really appreciate your description of the tremendous challenges that Beijing is facing in terms of the growing water consumption, the quality challenges, ecosystems and floods, and the growing tremendous difficulties that climate change will impose. And you show not only the importance of large infrastructure to try to solve these issues, but also the complexity of the interconnection with large river basins that surround Beijing that are an integral part of the solution. And you talk not only about infrastructure, but also very practical nature-based solutions and spatial planning. And I especially like what you said of the importance of opening up new green spaces for the population of the city, and how dredging can not only help with the flooding, but also can help with the creation of those spaces. The private sector engagement and the governance models that you described are particularly relevant for other cities around the world. And the interagency coordination, the diagram, I particularly enjoyed in that process, which is very real on how everybody needs to know where to go, but everybody needs to see also what are the routes that others are taking to help each other, to coordinate with others, to leverage the functions that they're doing. Let's move now from Beijing to Milan. And then let me invite Marina Trentin, who is the project manager for Urban Resilience Department in the city of Milan. She works on sustainability and green urban regeneration, really leveraging ecosystem services to improve the quality of life for citizens of Milan and to enhancing the resilience of communities to climate change. Ms. Trentin is going to be talking about governance and multi-benefit approach to water management in the city of Milan. Marina, please, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much to you, Ed, and thank you for this invitation. Now I will try to share my screen now in order to have the presentation done. So please just let me know if you see it well.
We can see it very well. Thank you so much. You can go ahead.
Thank you very much. I will try to stay in my 10 minutes time. So I will go rapidly through who I am and why we are here. So the municipality, I work for the municipality of Milan, and in particular for the city resilience office that is in a particular and strategic position, because we are operative in contact with a lot of any different directions and departments in the city of Milan. You know that the city of Milan is an important business center in Italy. It's the second city of Italy, but probably it is the first for business purposes. And we are dealing with what we call wicked problems. We are dealing with problems that are complex and need integrated answers in order to be answered. And that's why we had to concentrate on how to manage them and how to manage the governance of these problems. And most of all, we needed to understand how to govern the answers to these problems. First of all, we have to start from where we are and why we are discussing about adaptation and climate change adaptation, since we are in a city in which we have an average of increasing temperatures, mainly during the hot seasons, and because of this and because of the shape of the city, it is very densely built. We have highlands of high temperatures, what we call heat island effect. And during heat waves, this becomes really severe year by year. And then we have problems about drought, since we have this alternance, this alternative frequency of extreme weather events with a lot of water raining down in very, very short times, and this is alternate to drought periods. It means that we also have problems in managing that groundwater level, and all of this in Milan in particular is strictly connected to air pollution, because we are in a position in which in the Poplan, the pollution tends to stop and is not just winded away. So why are we talking about resilience? You know, this is, I mean, you already know everything about this, but what we need to do is to let the city not just survive and adapt, but directly grow, living inside this framework of very complex problems that need complex answers. That's why we created the Green and Environment Department. This department puts together, is a direction, literally, what we call it, that involves 3 different units: the urban resilience, in which I work in, the climate and energy area, and the water resources and environmental hygiene area. That is more about everything about environmental hygiene. So if you look at these 3 units, you can understand that we overcome the problems of having silos in which we discuss each one its own matter, but we try to integrate them. And that's why our department, our direction, is responsible for the implementation of the environmental and energy policies. It's about, of course, resilience issues, but it's also about anything that is in the field of environment. And since we are inside city and municipal government, we need to answer to these 5 pillars about equity, accessibility, renaturalization, decarbonization, and active participation in order to have a social equal access to any kind of service that is given to the that is given by the city to the citizens and to the private sector. And mainly we are focusing on ecosystem services that are involved inside the services. How we do this? We try to have an overview on actions, on plans, and on strategies that are commonly implemented by the municipality. Again, each of these strategy, each of these program, each of these kind of planning instruments, we will see some of them after, means that we need to work together, and every of us has to know what is happening and how we are implementing, for example, the urban forestation program. There is this Forestami here on the right, but we also need to interlock it with the School Oasis program. There is a forestation and the pavimentation action on schools, but is strictly connected to the greening plan of the city. And this is just an example. I'm focusing more on water management today, but this is again to point out that water management is not about water. Oh man, it is not only about water, because we had to look for innovative solutions and to get out, to break out our silos. So first of all, we had to make a vulnerability analysis, but this is the metropolitan area of Milan. You can see the city of Milan. It's the red circle that you see in the middle of the picture. So you can understand why and how we have these great problems about being impervious because of the density of the buildings. So why did you do this? Because we needed to know what was going on. My colleague here from Beijing, he really described very well what means knowing the area in which you are operating. But to know everything about managing water means that also you need to know everything that is about your territory, everything that is about your master plan, everything that is about social and economic aspects of the city. So where are our dangerous areas? Which are our risks? We had to point it out and understand which were the vulnerability assets with which we had to deal. This is, for example, this is just an example about extreme weather events for river flooding. It's not just local flash floods and about runoff. This is really, really a particular one. And you can see that some blocks and some part of the city are more vulnerable with higher risks than others. So after knowing what's going on, we went through how can we answer, which are the plans and projects we can use for covering and tackling these kind of problems. First of all, green city. People who live in Milan must have a green city, because green is not just something in which is nice to live, that creates social areas and that gives a sort of general ecosystem service, but it is also a way to reopen impervious surfaces. It is also a way to create a forestation program. It is also a way to, I would say, also manage in a coordinate way different aspects of the city government. That's why we did this through the PGT. It means this is a master plan of the city. And for example, this is the part of the plan, the strategy 5, that wants to make the way for the environment, for the green and blue environment, for the green and blue infrastructures, in order to understand which are the environmental services that are given from the green and blue infrastructure, but also where they are and who they are for. After that, we created, for example, more space for an ecological approach. For example, working with the housing rules, putting, for example, inside the master plan, incentives for enhancing the standards of housing sustainability. In this, we also put the renaturalization and the maximization of any kind of permeable surface. It means that we can better manage the runoff in our impervious blocks. It means that we need to work with the house area, the house management area. We have to work. We have to deal with the city urban planning. We have to deal with the city green management area, and we have to deal with social and economic issues. Or another way we decided to work towards is this plan for. It's a program for reopening the Navigli. Navigli are historical channels that were used in that was in the past, not so far in the past, because they were used until half of last century. So why are we working through that? Because we need to answer complex problems with complex answers. And in this case, reopening the Navigli means creating green and blue areas, and so supplying green and blue ecosystem services, but also to mitigate the temperature, collect water and runoff water, support the heating and cooling system, for example, by heat pumps, and offer more facilities for social activities, for example, sports or just outdoor enjoyment, and supporting the creation of the enhancement of assets for the real estate. And then we put it also inside another plan that, and I'm going to finish it, that integrates all the activities, all the governance actions going through the cooling area or the cooling of creation of cooling areas inside the city of Milan in order to tackle the problem of heat island, and at the same time to create what we call a sponge city. So work on sustainable drainage systems means create green areas, means create permeable areas, and means also create, for example, green on top of or around of buildings. So we are working on nature-based solutions that have different and many different kind of benefits. not the least, the social and economic ones. The paving program that is more on flood and heat waves prevention, but means, and here I put the kind of stakeholders we need to put together. So the general direction, the environmental transition direction, the urban planning direction, local municipal governments inside the city, and so on. And then the forestation program. This is just a few examples I am making for this. And in this case, again, for planting 3 million trees at the metropolitan scale means that we have to work with all the metropolitan stakeholders. We have to put them around the table and ask them to work with that. We have to put all the parks in the northern part and in the southern part of the city and put all of them around a table and discuss, create a governance program. In this case, this is the Forestami program. That is also an instrument tool for the governance of green solutions. So thank you. I'm sorry if I went out.
Thank you so much. No, fantastic presentation. Many thanks. I like some of the principles that you highlighted on equity, on renaturalization, on active participation. And it's interesting to see how many very particular programs and actions you have in the city of Milan, and how that complexity helps to tackle, as you were saying, complex, wicked problems. I enjoy the idea of a waterproof city. And really to know that to understand well the city, your message that is not only enough to know about water, but also about society and economy is very real. The actions on urban adaptation, water adaptation cannot be done in the abstract. And your work on space and ecology and incentives for housing to renaturalize and to really make the city more of a sponge, but also better on management of the cooling. I found it fascinating. And that idea, many people only talk about green spaces, but you come and say, look, it's green and blue spaces, and how to, because the blue spaces are not lost spaces. They can be an integral part of the city for use, for recreation, for fishing, for cooling, and therefore that integrated view of green and blue spaces is something that I really enjoy. So Marina, thank you so much for that very structured and interesting presentation. And now we move to our third city, to the city of New York. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Elijah Hutchinson, who is the Vice President of Waterfronts in the Neighborhood Strategy Department of the New York City Economic Development Corporation. Mr. Hutchinson's focus is really to facilitate long-term planning and redevelopment projects on the New York City's waterfront, inclusive of infrastructure and open space and mixed-use development. And Mr. Hutchinson is going to be talking today about that important interface between economic development and climate resilience in New York City. So Elijah, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And before you start, let me invite all of the participants that if you have questions for the speakers, you can start putting them in the chat to start kicking off the conversation. There were extremely rich conversations, extremely rich presentations, and I have tons of questions, and I'm sure that all of the participants will have many, many more. So Mr. Hutchinson, please go ahead. We look forward to learning about New York City. Thank you.
Great, thank you. You can see my screen, correct?
I can see your screen. Please go ahead.
Okay, wonderful. My name is Elijah Hutchinson. I'm a Vice President of Waterfronts. And since I'm presenting last out of the three cities, I think I'm gonna just focus in on some lessons learned, the various roles of government and governance in this process, and some differences that I've noticed between the cities already as we are all presenting from our own perspectives. I am the Vice President of Waterfronts because we realized early on that there needed to be a dedicated role and focus on waterfronts with its very particular regulatory and planning context. New York City is different than what I could see from some of your cities in that we don't really have a master plan. We have zoning resolutions and land use codes that dictate, uses and development, but there's no overall guiding master plan document for the city as a whole. A lot of that planning happens at the community scale. After Hurricane Sandy, which happened in 2012, that was the New York City's big wake-up call for realizing the big impacts of climate change. And since then, we've invested over $20 billion, largely focused on reducing coastal storm risks from hurricanes. And we've also been coordinating with the state and federal government and other local plans to guide investments since 2013. There were over 400 initiatives listed in a Stronger, Resilient New York. And since then, we've been going through a portfolio of projects to try and tackle this problem from many different angles. One of the things, here we go, to talk about the different roles of government, we have various levels. One is the city council, which is a body of local elected officials. They have done things like mandate that sea level rise is included in a building code so that when new buildings are being built, they're built at an elevated level. They have also adjusted the structure of the city government by funding a permanent Office of Climate Resilience, which is the role to coordinate across multiple city agencies. The state has also passed and funded the Environmental Bond Act, which allows for special dedicated funding sources for nature-based and resilience projects. They also have done things like mandated flood risk disclosure so that when renters of property or buyers of property are making investments, they know what their flood risks and vulnerabilities are. They've expanded financing programs so that we can retrofit properties more using property tax credits. And we've also, there's obviously a big role for the federal government, which we've had more recent storms like Ida. We name our storms here Ida, Sandy, if you hear some of these names. Sandy was a very big coastal storm. Ida was a very big rainstorm. And one thing that the federal government has done is provide funding for voluntary buyouts of property. They pass large-scale infrastructure bills. They manage the National Flood Insurance Program, and they also create new federal emergency management grant programs like the Building Resilient Infrastructure Communities Program to provide funding to local governments for resilience projects. That mayor's office that was established by the city council is now called the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. We combined various climate and sustainability and environmental coordination and remediation offices all into one centralized mayor's office so that those activities can be coordinated better throughout the city. One thing that the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice does is release policy and framework documents that help guide the city and the city agencies so that we are all more or less working towards the same goal. It starts with evaluating the relative impacts of multiple climate hazards. Another lesson learned was when we have a disaster, there's a lot of funding that comes for that one particular hazard, but we need to take a multi-hazard approach to this work. So it needs to take into account higher temperatures, precipitation, coastal storms, not just drainage and not just intense rain. We also established a body called the New York City Panel on Climate Change, which takes the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change projections, and localizes them in a consortium of universities, institutions, city officials, we use that to be the basis of our design projections and how we organize how we think about risk of the city assets and infrastructure. So that New York City Panel on Climate Change is a really helpful data resource for us. And we also try to coordinate across all of the different agencies to have targeted measures, projects, and partnerships focused on implementation through 2020 to 2050. Of the Economic Development Corporation where I am, we think about learning from yesterday, addressing the problems today, and preparing for tomorrow. That's basically how we think about resilience. We are a technically a nonprofit of the mayor's office. We aren't a city agency. We exist to coordinate on behalf of the city priority projects, large-scale complicated projects, and are able to be more flexible and nimble than some of our city agencies are able to do. We report directly to a deputy mayor, which reports directly to the mayor. We have many projects across all of the 5 boroughs that we're building wetlands, we're trying to shore up our food supply, we are elevating streets, we're building new green infrastructure. This is all to say that in each of these projects and places, one of the big lessons learned is that you need to take the time to define what resilience means for that project and for that community. And it may mean very different things. It could be about water quality, it could be about energy supply, it could be about placemaking, or you know, a working waterfront, integrating manufacturing and industrial assets into a resilient neighborhood plan. There's so many different approaches, and so it's been really important to take the time and discuss with people what the goals are and what we're all working towards before we start our projects and our planning. I'm going to focus a little bit on Lower Manhattan coastal resilience, which is a huge priority for us. The Lower Manhattan, if you're not familiar, is a central place for a lot of our infrastructure. Half of the people who commute, half of the people who work in Lower Manhattan are from the other 4 boroughs. A third are not even from New York City. And only 17% of the people who work in Lower Manhattan actually come from Manhattan. The majority of our subway lines pass through here. Major ferry connections to other boroughs pass through here. And so it's a really critical area to protect, but it will also begin to flood monthly by the 2040s, which is very, very soon, because the Lower Manhattan is the original historic part of New York City and is low-lying and was built over time and filled in with wetlands. We currently have a master plan for Lower Manhattan in and of itself, where we are rebuilding the waterfront. We are funded with over $1 billion currently. Most of that is city funded with some federal participation. But we have started a campaign to reconstruct our waterfront for several miles. We have already broken ground on one project, the East Side Coastal Resilience Project, and we are breaking ground on Brooklyn Bridge, Montgomery Coastal Resilience. In a few months, we are breaking ground on the west side of Manhattan as well this year. So much of the Lower Manhattan waterfront as we know it is changing and will be under construction. For the seaport and the historic heart of the waterfront here near Wall Street and a financial center, we were not able to find a plan because the land is so restricted. And so here we're actually extending the waterfront and filling in the water and building out into the water, creating a new shoreline for Lower Manhattan. This is the master planning process that we just went through. We just released our designs. I won't go into a lot of depth here, except you can go to FIDI-seaportclimate.nyc to download our full plan and read all about it. But we have to build out into the water in order to create the space for resilient infrastructure. This is the condition today. It's very constrained. It's mostly on pile supported structures. And there's an elevated highway and a ferry terminal. And these are some of the conditions that we're planning for the future, making sure that we're providing for new open spaces, opportunities to enhance the ecology of the East River. We're rebuilding all of the infrastructure that is in the area and creating an elevated 2-tiered waterfront experience to protect against that regular tidal flooding that we could see by the 2040s, as well as those coastal storm surges that we are at risk for today. We also want to make sure we have a universally accessible waterfront for all New Yorkers, and that we are designing a place that people can really want to experience and enjoy, as well as integrating our goals of sustainability and green infrastructure into our resilience framework. New York City has a goal for carbon-free electricity for all of New York by 2040. We are also, our goal is to be completely carbon neutral economy by 2050. So sustainability and energy is very much integrated into all of our planning in order to meet those extremely aggressive targets. Our team, just to give you a sense of how we develop plans like this, New York City Economic Development Corporation and my team, lead the entire planning process, the engineers, the architects, the community engagement, with that mayor's office providing the overall coordination across the city agencies. We speak mostly to our transportation, park, city planning, and environmental protection agencies, who all have their own responsibilities and assets in this conversation, and we have to bring all of that together. And then we, hire consultants to get us through the design process, the technical analysis, the engineering feasibility throughout this. We also have to convene our regulators. This is extremely important for us. The city itself does not decide what can go where. We have a body of state and federal regulators that give us approvals, mostly because of our impacts to the waterways, that we, in an unprecedented way, got the Army Corps, the Coast Guard, the Department of Environmental Conservation, our fisheries organizations, all together through the planning process, which is not typically what they do, but we've needed to create new frameworks in order to address these regulations, because these regulations were created before people thought about climate change. We also created a community coalition for the public called the Climate Coalition of Lower Manhattan, and had many public meetings where we combined citywide stakeholders, local organizations, waterfront advocates into a new organization that can be the body of community voice within our planning process. Rising tides will start to compromise a lot of these waterfront assets here. This is there's a heliport here. There is our connection to Staten Island with the Staten Island Ferry Terminal. There's connections to various islands throughout the New York Harbor, as well as historic districts in the area. Our new plan will be complete reconstruction, and we're rebuilding ferry terminals that have only existed for 20 years. But now that we realize the impacts of climate change, those assets and terminals are going to experience operational impacts in the coming decades. So it's really important that we act now. We have various funding sources that we coordinate with. This project alone, this one stretch from the Brooklyn Bridge down to the waterfront, costs $5 to $7 billion to implement. And so there's not one funding source that solves for this problem. We've analyzed many different funding sources as well that are really challenging to implement, that are in red, that include an insurance surcharge for property owners that are benefiting from the flood protection project, private property owners, resilient assessment districts where we have an assessment based off their square footage and attack that onto property tax bills, as well as we looked at revenue from new development, having new residential or office or commercial development integrated in the plan to help pay for either the upfront capital or the ongoing maintenance of the property. Those have proven to be the more non-traditional sources, and also very challenging because of the legislation and the political coordination required to enact some of those things. And then we have evaluated many different potential governance structures to be able to get us there. We realize that projects of this scale require special purpose entities for implementation, ongoing maintenance, and there are different ways to approach these types of governance structures. There's what we have today, which is the city agencies, and where we're limited is that the city agencies aren't typically mandated to be responsible for resilience and climate change. In New York, we don't have any one body that is accountable for this. And so the New York City Economic Development Corporation, as a special entity in and of itself, is taking the lead here. But there is no waterfront agency for New York City, and there's no climate and resilience agency. And so we look at creating these public special benefit corporations. Sometimes they're state-controlled public authorities, and sometimes there are also local development corporations that are nonprofit corporations that are sponsored by the local government. The differences in some of these are their ability to fundraise and finance, whether they can issue bonds, whether they can lobby the government and enact legislative change, and whether you have dedicated staff that is specialized to be able to manage what is a new infrastructure and asset class for the city that we're creating. So there's various considerations depending on what you want the role of those entities to be. But we have throughout the city created special development corporations like in Hudson Yards Development Corporation or Brooklyn Bridge Park Development Corporation to be able to enact these large scale projects and make sure we have dedicated specialized funding and staff, and that those entities and organizations can see through the really long-term master plans. We are, yeah, I'll stop there. That's it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hutchinson. Fascinating. Even in a city like New York, the complexity of the governance arrangements that are needed for action on adaptation is just tremendous. And I really like your description of how your NGC was created to really move forward faster and more effectively and in connected ways to get project design and implementation and action on the ground as fast as possible. But at the same time, that speed needs to be complemented with taking the time to define what is resilience for a specific different community. That specificity was something that is particularly important as you handle adaptation. A fascinating master plan in Lower Manhattan, and that message that actually you need to build into the water to be able to have the space to create adaptation is a lesson to many cities in the developing world, where the lock-in effects, the choices that they make on land use are going to have consequences for decades or centuries to come. And the retrofitting is going to be very expensive if you don't think of that. And your example of having to deal and rebuild or retrofit 15-year-old ferry terminals because climate change is going to affect them very soon is quite a telling lesson altogether. So I really appreciate the frankness and the clarity of your presentation on New York City. And just to let you know that questions are coming up, and will be coming up to the panelists. There have been questions on really monitoring and evaluation to see on the initial measures what are the benefits that are happening on things as simple as local microclimate. How are you seeing the targets on climate mitigation and greenhouse gas reduction in your cities and the coordination with adaptation measures? How are you handling some of the tensions? For example, if you have too little water or too much water, questions of environmental justice, tensions between farmers upstream and cities downstream, and competition for water in a changing climate. What mechanisms have you used to resolve them? And really, how are you able to combine and balance those infrastructure and nature-based solutions? And are nature-based solutions really cost-effective and useful in dealing with climate adaptation? Is there real substance behind the message that sometimes sounds like fluff? So interesting questions. We're not going to answer them, but just to give you a heads up that these are the ones that are coming up in the chat. I invite all of the participants to put more questions that will help me facilitate the conversation moving forward. But we have two commentators, two people with great experience on these topics to really reflect and compare and contrast the three presentations that you have heard. The first special guest is Catherine Brubach, who is the Global Director for Programs, Innovation and Impact in the Resilient City Network. And in the RC Cities program, she really oversees the design and delivery of the activities across the urban landscape that connect the city needs with resilient solutions, and really is responsible for the development of the thematic priorities in the Resilient City Network on circular economy, climate resilience, and equity and recovery. So Catherine, your thoughts, your reactions to these three presentations. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me today, and thank you so much for these amazing presentations. It's definitely great to see what is actually happening. I think a reflection from my side, and I guess I have to say that although I'm a water person, I've been working around water resilience, and Arnaud, who's joining me today, and a few others in the call know that, is I think when we are working with our cities around building resilience, and we're looking specifically around climate resilience, but I also would like to stress that climate resilience is only part of the work we are doing, because if we are talking about resilience as the capacity to respond to shocks and stresses, so climate impacts is a part of shocks and stresses. There are a lot of other things that can happen. And I think we heard that in the presentations about what about social cohesion, what about, and especially on the presentations from the US, what about the vulnerabilities and the inequality aspects. And I know that specifically in the US, there's a lot of focus about what does climate resilience mean for different parts of the communities. So are there specifically colored communities that are more impacted by climate change than others? So I think the important part here from my perspective is that building resilience requires that you are looking beyond your actual field of work. So yes, you may deal with water-related shocks and stresses or climate-related shocks and stresses, but there's a lot of other stuff. And a city is a complex system of systems that all depend on each other. And I think this is the part I would really like to stress out. And I'm glad to see somebody from the Milan Resilience Office and Arnaud on this call who have been dealing with these facts, that they know it's not only about climate change adaptation, it's about a lot of other priorities cities have. And to tackle them, that requires that you have a dedicated person that looks at all these different aspects and is not just working in his specific field. This is my area of work, that is able to connect multiple agencies and multiple departments within the city together. So to become a convener, to become a person who always makes sure that the information goes into the right direction. And I think the example from Elijah is a perfect one, is if you're accessing so many different funding sources, if you have so many players in there, it's not just a climate issue anymore. It becomes a multiple systems issue, and that requires cities to think differently about how they tackle that. And I think this is what we are trying to do through our resilience offices in the cities.
Catherine, thank you very much. Let me now invite Arnaud Molenaar, who is the Chief Resilience Officer of the City of Rotterdam and lead cities specialist at GCA. And Arnaud was first editor of the book Resilient Cities and Climate Adaptation Strategy. He was responsible for Rotterdam's first resilience strategy, and joined the GCA as lead specialist for cities in 2018. Arnaud, your thoughts. You have been part of these conversations with Beijing before, and you have seen the connections throughout. So how do you see these issues of urban governance and the three presentations made today?
Thank you, Eda, for the opportunity to share my reflections. And to start with, I was a little bit hesitating what digital background on my screen to use, because I have a hat that is representative for the Global Center, but also I'm active in the steering committee of the Resilient Cities Network, and in daily life also working for the city of Rotterdam. And yes, in the previous, I think, two workshops with Beijing, our colleagues over there, I already shared a lot about with Johan, my colleague at Rotterdam, about the content and the water and climate challenges in the city. So I will not go into this now, but it's all about when I look at the three amazing presentations. By the way, I see the complexity, how to deal with complexity as a kind of a common thread to all the presentations. And building upon what Katrien said, we discovered at the City of Rotterdam that it helps to develop this holistic resilience strategy for two reasons. Because it helps to connect the different challenges, the energy transition. We do have also a huge challenge on biodiversity and the ecological challenges, the climate, the social aspects, etc. And such a strategy also helps to get the right stakeholders on board. So, and within the city, like in our situation, the water boards, the port, but also on a bigger scale, the national government, but also internally. Yeah? So Beijing is a huge city with a lot of specific departments and silos, I guess, like in others, a lot of other cities. And this resilience strategy can help function as a kind of an umbrella to bring these different departments also together. And when people inside, outside the municipality feel this strategy as they feel their own ownership, that's a good starting point to work on these topics. And again, I also recognize that we are all working on different scales, from the basin level to the city level. District scale is an important one in Rotterdam, all the way to street level, and even what citizens should do in their backyard garden. If we want to become an ecological, friendly and strong and climate adaptive city, we have to be active on all those scales. My last point of reflection is more about, I haven't heard people talk a lot about this so far, but it's about knowledge exchange. We discovered sharing knowledge within the city and with our universities, for example, is also crucial in finding the right solutions and also just do research and knowledge sharing between the cities. And then I'm coming back to the Resilient Cities Network that also helped us in tackling these challenges. What I understand is that Beijing is also starting to think and work on a more holistic resilience strategy. So yeah, I think there are a lot of common themes that we can exchange on as peer-to-peer cities. Yeah, thank you, Eda.
Arnaud and Catherine, thank you very much for those comments and for bringing those perspectives, both from the Resilient City Network and from the cities of Rotterdam. I see several comments and questions in the chat. So I'm gonna start grouping them in 2 or 3 and then go to the panelists in order to be able to get your reactions. So let's start with the first 3 questions. First, I'm particularly interested to hear your reactions on what surprised you or what you found interesting from the other 2 cities. So Mr. Wei, I'd love to hear what are your thoughts on what do you hear from Milan and New York, or Elia, what do you hear from Milan and Beijing, so that we can get a little bit of cross-reference into this process. And then 2 more questions. First one is on results and measurement. You are taking a variety of measurements, a variety of actions, and how do you measure the benefits, the impacts of this? What is the monitor and evaluation system that you put in place to learn quickly as you improve the program, you take new sections in new activities into this program? So second question, monitor and evaluation. And then third question, how are you connecting the climate mitigation commitments that each of your cities have with the adaptation program? What is the interface between climate mitigation and climate adaptation? Because it doesn't always happen in many spheres of the economy. And I'll be interested to see from your perspectives in Beijing, in Milan, in New York, how is mitigation and adaptation connected? So let's first go to Mr. Wei, then I'll go to Mr. Ntin, and then to Mr. Hutchinson. Mr. Wei, please go ahead.
Very well. It is my great pleasure to have listened to our 2 colleagues as well as the esteemed panelists before. After I listened to our Milan colleague, I have found that there is a striking similarity between Beijing and Milan, and there are many similar measures and we face similar problems. I have taken notes as I saw one of the photos in the presentation, Nagvili. It is a river in the city. And the way it was governed, the banks that had been reinforced, this is actually what we call something that is non-conventional. So the rivers have been reopened in a sense. So I would like to hear more about how it is being reopened. Has it been dredged, or what other measures have been taken in Beijing in order to improve our water quality and in order to sort of release land resources for the city? Sometimes we would cover up certain sections of natural river, but now as we try to enhance and restore our ecosystems, we reopen those covered up sections of the natural rivers and return the rivers to the water system. And there is actually a very profound pair of conflict between development, land use, and ecosystem restoration. So I would like to raise that question to my Milan colleague as to how they had dealt with that pair of conflict.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wei. I really like you asking questions to each other. So let's go to Marina. So Marina, again, what do you find interesting about New York and Beijing? Second, monitoring and evaluation of results. Third, how are you coordinating mitigation and adaptation programs in Milan?
So it's okay. Thank you also for the questions. It was an artificial channel, but we have other 2 rivers in the city, 3 rivers in the city, and we are planning to have a river restoration program in order to have them renaturalized. So this is just a brief answer to Mr. Wei's question. About what I was talking about complexity, since, for example, governance complexity in Italy, it's about putting together national laws, regional laws, metropolitan area laws, and municipal city master plan. But what I've seen in New York and in Beijing is, of course, more complex. So what I was really interested in having a look was how it was described and how all these different levels, the equivalent levels, are coordinated together. So I will also bring it because it is an interesting point of view, in my opinion, because things are managed in different ways. And of course, dimensions of the cities are really different, but also the different scales of any responsibility was interesting. So I will look through them, and of course I would need a translation for Mr. Wei presentation, but I will go through the 2 presentations also for better understand if there is a parallel and how I can use it, reporting it to my office. Then about everything that is about monitoring and the answer to how to put together mitigation, adaptation, and I would add air quality programs. We have what we call PAC. I just went through that very quickly before in my presentation. It's what we call air and climate plan. It is something that puts together mitigation measures, air quality measures, and adaptation measures. Since some of them they must go together, and some of them they are synergic one to each other. For example, you can work on mitigation both by diminishing the CO2 emissions, but also absorbing CO2 with green infrastructures. So you can work together with synergies, and you have to govern this different approach in order to with just one single plan. And this is what we call it's sort of adaptation and mitigation plan, but it also works on air quality because it is also using that kind of synergy.
Thank you so much, Marina. Let me
sorry, and for the monitoring is inside this, and we have a monitoring program inside that. Sorry, this is the monitoring program inside the plan, so that you have a baseline. We have a baseline assessment, and we will assess impacts and activities on the base of this baseline. Sorry, I was missing the other part.
No problem. And Marina, if I may ask, any interesting results from that monitoring and evaluation, things that you found that worked really well, even better than expected, and things that didn't work as well, that you learned through that monitoring and evaluation. And because you always find with so many actions you're taking, some work super well, some don't work as well, and that helps you adapt. So any lessons that can be shared with city officials participating today?
Yeah, I think again, since we just started, we've been working on it for quite a long time, I must say, but since we changed our council, our city council just a few months ago, we had to stop the adoption and the adoption procedure of the plan, and we had it officially approved just 1 month ago. But point was that working all together, different directions, working together, and also using what we call it's a sort of it's a municipality-owned company that is our technical support for any kind of plan. And we've been working together with them anyway, also before the official approval of the plan. So the first lesson we had to learn is that any kind of monitoring activity and implementing activity, when you work in synergy, must be done in a sort of technical committee government approach. So, for example, I directly work on monitoring systems, monitoring and on assessment activities with my colleagues from the public-owned company that works as a technical support for the municipality of Milan. Its name is AMAT, A-M-A-T. It's an agency for environmental and urban planning, more or less. And then I work directly with people dealing with energy and CO2 reduction, and I work directly with people dealing with air quality and mobility. It's just an example, but point was breaking the silos.
Breaking the silos through monitor evaluation. Thank you so much. Let me go to Elijah. So again, the questions. What do you find interesting from Beijing and Milan? Second, monitor and evaluation. What are the lessons that you're beginning to find? And third, how are you connecting the very proactive climate mitigation action plan of New York with your adaptation and resilience program?
Yeah, great questions. I was really interested to hear Beijing have the structure where it seemed like you have local kind of captains for your waterways and rivers. That's not something that we have here. People are and I was curious how those interface with the more central government, or if those are considered local representatives or representatives of the city municipality, and kind of how that dynamic works. And then for Milan, it was interesting to see renaturalization as a specific goal. There's almost nothing natural in New York anymore. The Central Park is man-made. So we try to introduce these projects end up being green and having planting because there's a balance there to strike with green and gray infrastructure, and making sure that these places are attractive, inviting, and open, and address other things like the urban heat island effect that is another is the biggest killer of people in New York City. It's actually heat. So those things do get integrated, but I was curious what that goal actually ends up meaning in the context of projects, if you're targeting specific ecosystems when you're thinking about renaturalization? Is it a historical precedent, a particular moment in time that you're looking to go back to, or some kind of optimization of like a broader, goal around what the city wants around their policies of naturalization? So I thought those two things were interesting. We are just getting started on a lot of this work with the M&E. So, I think that we're currently creating those accountability structures. A lot of that accountability oversight is coming from our management, our offices, our budget offices, our financing offices, and the people who distribute money to help fund projects at the city level, and then the people in government who are responsible for kind of good governance. You can call them comptrollers sometimes, but they are the ones that are even now just starting to create infrastructure around that. I would say we're very early within the M&E conversation, and would actually love to learn from others about, how they even evaluate that and what they apply to projects in order to be able to go through with that. And then we have a very aggressive climate mitigation goals around decarbonization. We have less than 20 years to have a carbon-free energy supply for the whole city, and we have less than 30 years to be completely net zero carbon neutral, the entire city. That these are huge goals, and what we've done is created councils, industry experts, regulators, and policymakers all together to start to analyze all of the different scenarios and pathways to get to complete decarbonization for our economy. And we go industry by sector, by transportation, by electricity, and look at all of the different things that we need to do to get there, and engage with environmental justice communities, engage with other stakeholders to start to develop programs and guidance around all of the infrastructure that's going to be necessary to get there. Those rules were just passed in this past year. And so now we're in the process of forming all of those councils, and we're releasing the scope of work for that document in the coming months to actually articulate all of the proposals that will be necessary in order to achieve those goals, and also the analysis and backup to show that it is actually possible to achieve those goals if we do certain actions by certain times. And that includes goals around electric vehicle charging. It includes goals around wind, and making sure we clean our grid around demand response. So it's a quite comprehensive and robust plan that we'll have to in order to be carbon neutral by 2050.
Absolutely. So look, fascinating challenges. I can see how so much is starting and so much is to be learned into this process, and therefore these exchanges become particularly important. I want to encourage all of our Chinese participants to ask your questions in Chinese in the chat. We have interpretation, and we love to be able to establish those links and dialogues between the panelists and you. I want now to go through the next set of 3 questions, and then we'll go again, panelist by panelist. You can choose which questions are more applicable to your specific circumstance. Question number 1 is on conflict and tension between different stakeholders in your cities. With greater impacts of climate change and more variability, then there are tensions because there is not enough water, or the water is not of good quantity, and there will be tensions between different users inside the city, farmers around, or if there are floods, there are tensions in between communities, and what are the resilience actions. And we're interested to learn in your specific city, what are the processes by which you are able to surface those tensions, discuss those tensions, and resolve those tensions. That's question number 1. Question number 2 is on the really difficult issue of comparing alternatives, because you can have all of gray infrastructure solutions, but in reality, there's no way to build yourself enough protection with concrete in a city. At the other extreme is all about nature-based solutions that need a lot of space that the city doesn't necessarily have, and there's everything in between. How in your city do you analyze different options across that spectrum, and how do you choose? What methodologies do you use? How technical and scientific you get, or how kind of informed opinions you do? Tell us a little bit more about that decision-making process around alternatives from gray infrastructure to green solutions. And then the third question is on the issue of nature-based solutions. You know that everybody's really working on that. There's a lot of excitement. We really need to work with nature to tackle climate change. It's an important buffer to protect societies, communities, households. But because these are such new solutions, one of the questions is like, what are the unintended or unexpected benefits or consequences from those nature-based solutions? What is it that surprised you as you were implementing them that you didn't expect it because it was worse or it was better? Things happen in these new innovative solutions, and we're interested in learning more about them. So 3 questions. 1, how to handle tensions among your stakeholders on climate change and adaptation solutions. 2nd, how do you have analyzed the range of options from pure gray to pure green and everything in between? What are the methodologies you use? And 3rd, what surprises, what unexpected consequences or benefits have you found through implementing nature-based solutions? So I'll go first with Mr. Wei, then Marina, then Elijah. Baoyi, please go ahead.
Thank you. There was a question, from the New York speaker. I would like to respond to that first. So this river director is not an administrative role. Instead, it's a whole system in Beijing. So basically, the Beijing mayor is also the river director for all rivers in Beijing, and for different districts in Beijing. The district director is also the river director for that district. So it goes on like this. So every administrative director is also responsible for the rivers within that administration, and it goes down to street blocks, and in a certain community, a person can be chosen as a voluntary director, responsible for monitoring the water quality of the river. When they discover issues such as pollution, they can report to the upper level river director. And if, for example, if they see ecological issue such as pollution, flooding, and river logging, and they can just report that to the upper level director or the correspondent authority, because they are authorized to do so. In this way, the entire society is participating in the treatment of rivers. And so everyone has this ownership. And thank you for the questions. And from the participants, we understood that some are very interested in how Beijing tackles climate change. Well, we know that Beijing has developed really rapidly in the past 2 to 3 decades, and indeed, the economic boom has been at the cost of environment and ecology to a certain degree. Beijing has a very high population density. It also is confronted with problems such as the smog and water environment, including the overexploitation of the groundwater, which I covered in my presentation, which requires a basket of solutions, in particular relating to control of population, also the restructuring of the socioeconomic development. Take, for instance, the industrial development, and Beijing has already removed or upgraded these heavily polluting industrial sectors and activities, and they have already been moved to other places in China. For instance, there's steel factory has already been relocated to a seaside city where there is abundant resources to be used for the treatment of the sewage and discharge from the plant. And Beijing has also introduced measures to tackle water shortage and water pollution. For instance, the environmental impact assessment, so that any development project in the city has to go through EIA first. And so these development-oriented projects have to first conduct impact assessment on the water resources in order to understand whether the water capacity can actually withhold the upcoming project, and if not, the project will not be approved. That system is very rigorously enforced and being rolled out at a country level, so that in the context of climate change, we now understand how climate and environmental stresses should be prioritized. In terms of decarbonization, while Beijing is also aligned with the international community, we have the 2030 and 2060 goals. 30 is for carbon peak and 60 for carbon neutrality. And the most direct consequence is that Beijing has already outlined the 20% of clean energy in the energy mix. 20% for renewables in the energy mix, which is very ambitious. We will utilize more wind, geothermal, and solar, and also adopt more technologies, which are actually very daunting pressures for Beijing, but all authorities in Beijing are geared towards this 20% renewables goal. And for infrastructure, and you mentioned gray versus blue-gray infrastructure. Well, for Beijing, actually for the entire country, we already proposed this idea of smart city and ecological civilization a couple of years before, which targets at the equilibrium between gray versus blue and gray. My personal understanding is that the smart city concept itself is about normalizing urbanization in a way that the runoffs can be guaranteed. And for large infrastructure, they have to be flood control ready, and they must and these infrastructure, such as construction, has to put in place contingency plans, which include gray infrastructure, so that sudden weather events, extreme weather events such as flooding and torrential rains can be effectively mitigated and addressed. And so for these construction plans, we can't only rely on blue and green development. The blue and gray are very good add-ons that can improve the capacity on flood control, for instance, but the gray infrastructure itself is definitely fundamental when it comes to the contingency capacity and emergency response, for example, a disaster relief capacity of the city. Thank you very much. And I look forward to the comments of other experts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have about 5 minutes, so I'll ask Marina and Elia not to answer the 3 questions, but to pick one that is of special interest to you. So first, on the question of tensions between stakeholders and how you resolve them. Second, how do you analyze between the broader spectrum from gray to green solutions? And third, unexpected benefits or challenges that you found with nature-based solutions. So don't feel that you need to answer all 3. You can pick 1 or 2. so that we can finish on time. Thank you. Marina, you first, and then Elijah.
Yeah, thank you. So we have inside the for the stakeholder involvement and the creation of a sort of board on which we can have discussions and create a dialogue among all different stakeholders. We have provided one of the 5 pillars of the plan and air quality, for example, is about participation, is about stakeholder engagement, and is about creating a consciousness inside the city about climate change and about environmental issues, and in that having a sort of dialogue area for tensions, for conflicts, and so on. So this should be a sort of permanent board for this. And this is one. Or another example is to be a stakeholder as a municipality. For example, for river contracts, we have 3 different rivers that are flowing through the municipality or ending in the municipality area. In that case, we are one of the stakeholders participating to a higher level territorial contract. So we are one of the participants to the board of the river contract. So we can deal with other stakeholders and think about our tensions, for example, about hydraulic risks. In that case, I also put for a sort of a higher question for making choice and assessing the impacts of what's happening about climate change in the city. We are also exploring new tools and new experiences. We are experimenting, for example, climate budget approach. So how do we make choices among environmental impacts and climate impacts about any kind of actions of the municipality and economic impact of that, which is the asset, which is the cost, and for both CO2 and money. In both cases, we have, again, mitigation and adaptation going together. This is a question I put on the table because we are still experiencing in this. We are making a sort of pilot, but we still have no clear answers. But this could be a way for making choices, for example, MBS or gray measure. Hope to be clear in that.
Thank you so much. And we're moving now to New York, and I want to give a heads up for a 30-minute reflection from Joy, from Aiping, and from Madame Zhao before we close. Elijah, your thoughts. You can answer 1 or 2 questions. Again,
sure.
Conflict, tensions, methodologies, yeah. Green to gray, or surprises. Thank you.
Yeah, our projects are all of the projects that I've worked on are often quite controversial. They, frequently communities are advocating for a lot of needs, whether it's better schools or public safety or open space or affordable housing, and then a disaster, and they're told that there's no money for any of those things, and then something happens, and then all of a sudden there's $300 million for a project that people feel like they didn't ask for, but protects the city for our broader resilience goals. And so it's really important to bridge that gap and to make sure the communities see themselves in the work. Do that. What we've taken the approach is to really co-create through the design process, to really share power and decision making when that's possible, and to make sure we're really almost radically transparent with the technical analysis that we're doing, with how we're going through the alternatives analysis, and to make sure that we have buy-in at every step of the way, so that we're just not releasing a design at the end that people don't understand or don't see that we've prioritized their concerns, but are really with us when we're sharing what the outcomes of our process are. And that's really been a much better way for us to do business here.
Thank you, Laia. I like the term of radical transparency, fundamental for adaptation. Final reflections, super short, 1 thought. Joy, Aiping, Madame Zhao. Joy?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, a huge thanks to everybody, because this was extremely rich. For me, a few keywords. One is the need to collaborate across stakeholders, across sectors. The need to put resilience into a wider perspective and the vital role of water. But for me, the one thought that stays is the potential of learning and sharing across the world, because so much have been done, so much is there to be learned from each other, and we have a common purpose, and that's basically to leave a livable world for our children. Thank you.
Thank you. One final reflection, I think, and then I go to Madame Zhao.
Thank you, Ede, and thank you for all our guests today for your contribution. I wish there have been more actually Chinese cities. I'm standing on my role of the regional director. More Chinese cities could have joined today to this. I'm pretty sure they all will appreciate this kind of exchange and knowledge sharing. Probably because of the timing, it's evening in China. But I think in the future, I think such activities is really, really useful. And we would definitely continue promoting this kind of exchange and involving more and more Chinese cities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Madame Zhao. Madame Zhao, if you have one final reflection. Wonderful. Let me just try to conclude with a big thanks to all of the speakers, Baoyi, Marina, Elijah, Catherine, and Arnaud. 3 points from my side. I think that governance is complex, is as complex, I think, as water adaptation, and should not be underestimated. It is fundamental to be able to be extremely participatory with all of the stakeholders, to be able to have clear buy-in. And then finally, the analysis of options between many different variables and new ways of approaching, from green space to blue space, from river basin to city, from riverfront to the waterfront to the inland. There are all these spaces that need participation, need analysis options, need all that process, all surrounding the uncertainty of climate change and what are the specific challenges that are going to come in terms of intensity and frequency of climate shocks moving forward. Thank you very much for all the participants. Thank you for all of you who have joined for these 2 hours of exchange. And it is a pleasure for the Global Center of Adaptation to have facilitated this conversation. And for me as a senior advisor to the CEO, much to be learned into this process. And there's a lot of experimentation happening. Let's continue these conversations moving forward. Thank you very much. Good morning, or good day, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Ede. Thank you, Marina.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.